To our guest speaker tonight, if you'd like to give your autobiography, you're welcome. This is Captain Paul Sperco. He has spoken here before. This gentleman has a tremendous amount of knowledge, so I'm going to let him introduce himself. And if we can, again, please make sure you silence your phones. If you have a conversation, please take it outside. Let's be respectful to our speaker tonight. Thank you. Good to see you.
And thank you for the invite back. It's been a couple years, but as usual, there's always a great crowd here, and I really enjoy coming here. And before I get going, there's a lot of handouts here that I'm going to be referring to during this. We have people that don't have handouts, correct?
Correct.
That need them? Okay. If you can, that'd be great.
Thank you, sir.
Another one, a couple more.
Yeah, maybe you can take a couple and just kind of drop them off on your way through. That way I can get going.
Winter surf fishing. Yeah, I'm not.
I'll wait for these pieces of paper to get out, and then we'll start. I always see, no matter where I go or where I do a seminar, I always see familiar faces. And there's a couple friends here tonight, right over here and right over here, that have listened to me babble many, many, many times about surf fishing. I give the handout because it's a format that I've been doing these seminars for about 12, 13 years. And it seems to be an easy way to kind of go from one point to another. And the thing is, if you're like me, the memory isn't what it used to be. So the bottom line is, a lot of stuff I'm going over with, you can take notes or you just take them home. And I got some folks that have been to 10 or 11 years of mine at Bass Pro that have a stack of handouts like this. The content always changes because the fishing, no fishing stays the same. And obviously this club is known for a lot of offshore stuff, you know, all the boats and the sailfish and all the bigger fish. But everything changes. So the reason I give the handouts is so if you wanted to refer to something, whether it's a beach, whether it's a bait, whether it's a technique, that's why I like to give them out. So now that everybody's got the handouts, I guess we can get going. Again, if you hadn't seen the bio, I'm not somebody that you folks grabbed off the street. I actually surf fish. I surf fish an average of 4 to 5 times a week. I moved here from New Jersey. I was an offshore fisherman in New Jersey for years and years and years. Came down here, I will be honest with you, anybody knows anything about Jersey, Long Beach Island, Island Beach State Park, I never set foot on them. I never threw a line in the water from the beach in New Jersey, not once. I came down here, I tried a party boat after I painted my house. And I learned you don't paint your house here in May, it'll about kill you with the heat. But I tried a party boat, and I used to work on party boats as a kid out of Brielle. It was one of the worst fishing experiences I ever had in my life. There was not a boat up here in Fort Pierce. It was further south. So at that point I decided, let me try surf fishing. I don't know anything about it, and I will tell you, and there's a few folks here have heard me say this, for about 6 months I didn't catch anything. Catch a jack now and then, or, you know, a ladyfish, you know, something stupid. I couldn't catch anything because I was the offshore. I knew what I was doing. Well, I'll tell you what, I knew nothing. I got friendly with Freddie, who owns the Snook Nook. And the reason I finally got into the surf fishing, I shut my mouth and opened my ears. I got involved with some people that had worked there in the Bass Pro that really knew what they were doing, and to this day, I thank them immensely because hopefully, if you're new to, and I think there's some folks here that probably have not done much surf fishing. If you're new to it, great. But what contained in some of these the handouts will save you some pain. So maybe you'll start catching fish in 2 weeks, or maybe your next trip out. My target whenever I do a seminar, if you are a beginner and you haven't done it before, if you kind of pay attention a little bit and read the handout, tackle, gear, locations, bait, it kind of points you in the right direction. If you are a dedicated surf fisherman, I hope that everybody gets to take, if you've been doing it, one tip or one suggestion that's going to make your next trip to the beach a little more successful. That's why I do the seminars. I mean, it's my passion, obviously, and I do them all over Florida for Bass Pro. We were talking about it earlier. I do the George Poveromo Saltwater Sportsman Magazine seminars. So it's something that I like doing, obviously, or I wouldn't be standing here talking to you about it. Personally, if you don't know me, and I'm going to tell you, catch 11 or 12 pompano. Everybody says, "Ooh, you can only keep 6." I have a commercial license, so I have the ability to do that. But I also I take people on the beach, and anytime I take people on the beach, it's a recreational limit. Commercial license has nothing to do with it. So I commercially fish, I guide, and then I fun fish. Usually Sunday is for my wife. She likes to fish. Keeps everything on a real even keel. Everything's good. But the nice thing about surf fishing, everybody can do it. You don't have to put diesel or gas in the boat. You didn't pay for insurance. You're not going to be 25 miles off the beach. All of a sudden, here comes a squall. You're running for the hills. If you get bad weather on the beach when you're up there, as soon as I see lightning, the worst thing that can happen is I pack everything up, I put it in my truck, I go home. So it's something everybody can do, and that's why I really like it. But I tell you, I take kids. You know, I'm only supposed to. I usually take 2 on a charter, but I get a family with a couple kids. I'll take everybody, and I'm sure everybody's had a situation where a niece, nephew, son, daughter, friend. You get a couple kids. I mean, I take whiting and croaker charters during the summer, and you see these kids reeling in these whiting and croaker on these little 7-foot rods, and boy, they don't want to stop. I mean, it does your heart good. But the point here is the surf fishing here can be as good as it gets. It's 12 months a year, 365 days a year. The only thing that changes are the type of fish that we catch depending on conditions, water temperature, and seasons. I mean, that's the whole thing. But if we had the conditions to fish for beach 365 days, you would have the ability to catch something. I tell everybody the same. Don't go to the beach hoping to catch something. I want everybody going to the beach expecting to catch something. Now, what you're going to get here tonight, just so everybody knows, you're going to get my condensed version. If anybody's been to my Bass Pro seminars, we're going to give it an hour here, and most fishing clubs are the same. It's an hour. I'm just getting warmed up at Bass Pro after an hour, and it usually goes 2.5, and with questions, I've had seminars last 4 hours, which is fine. If anybody has questions, if you could hold them for the end, it would be great. If anybody wants the full version, where I can go through every page you got in your hand, and that's what I do at the Bass Pro. They got me, Bass Pro has me doing 2 of them on March 8th and March 9th at Bass Pro Shops in Port St. Lucie on Gatlin Boulevard. So everybody is welcome to come, but I'm a surf fisherman. Again, the only boat fishing I do, I've been fishing on the Marathon Lady in Marathon, Florida for about 30 years. I know the people that own the boats. I know all the mates. I go down there and do a lot of yellowtail mangrove fishing. That's pretty much the only boat fishing that I do. Everything else is from the beach. Now, I will say real quick, because there are some people, of course, I'm relatively new to this group. I haven't been posting anything. And when I don't post catches or a fishing day, people start sending me texts and say, what the heck's going on, man? I tore my rotator cuff about a week and a half ago for the second time. So, and guess what I was doing? I was throwing that rod. Now, the first time I was showing my grandson how to throw a cast net. So, my season is probably over. Personally, my son will be doing some with me, you know, where I'm going to have to get this operation this time, and that's a 3 month. So, if anybody says, oh, you're not fishing anymore, well, I'm not fishing anymore because I can't. I will tell you, and I said this a little bit earlier, I've been going to the mosquito bridge because I can jig with my left hand. I tell you what, there's some, if you haven't been pompano jigging and you want to have some fun, 7-foot rod with a little 3/8 or a 1/2 ounce goofy jig on the bottom. I've been catching a couple almost every morning, and they're big fish. They're 2.5 pounds. I catch a couple, I put them in a cooler, I go home if I stay too long. Now, if you wanted to see something funny, the first one I hooked, of course, the first one I hooked when I couldn't use my right arm, I'm jigging with my left and I take the rod and I have to keep my elbow in. I slam the rod here, so now I'm holding it here. But the first one I caught last week was about 3 pounds. Now I got a 7-foot rod with 15 pound braid and a 20 pound shock leader. Now you reel it up to the bridge, to the water. Now what are you gonna do? I can't do the right arm. Tighten the drag, went down, reeled down to the fish, grabbed my rod with both hands, and usually when you bring them up over the rail at the mosquito bridge in Jensen, you bring them up, you know, the rails here, you just bring them up over the top. Well, if anybody had been walking behind me on a sidewalk, they would have got about a 3-pound pompano on the side of their head. I go ahead, first one I had tried, I flip it up, I'm looking up at it. I mean, it's up here. It landed on the sidewalk and caught it, and I've since refined the technique a little bit. I'm gonna hopefully get a couple more weeks out of that. But there are definitely some fish around. But anyway, if anybody's looking for posts on my catches, it's just probably not gonna happen now, because that's about a 3 month, after I get the operation done. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. This seminar is about pompano. From October to May, when I go and I get a group call me or a fishing club or anybody, October to May, it seems like there's only one fish in Florida, and that's pompano if you're fishing the beach. I call it pompano mania. That's because that's what it is. There's whiting, there's croaker, snook are showing up on the beach now. So there's other fish to catch. Nobody wants to know anything about it. And the thing about pompano fishing, but I have always said, and I said it before to a couple folks, pompano aren't hard to catch. They're hard to find. And they do not stay. We fish a beach. I'll give you an example. I helped my son yesterday. They showed up, the fish showed up down at right by the mansion there in Jensen Beach. We call it County, that's Glasscock Beach. 11, 12, I don't know what we had. We had 11 or 12 fish, nice fish. When he went back today, and he just raked in the sail catch. Not one pompano. If you go to a beach, I'll tell you that right now, when you catch fish, you never leave biting fish, even when you're out fishing. Pompano, go back to where you caught them the day before. If you catch them there again, the second day, boy, you're lucky. If by some chance, and we've had some situations, if you catch them 3 days in a row, stop fishing, nearest Cumberland Farms, get a lottery ticket, because it doesn't happen. That just doesn't happen. They will move on a tide, they will move on a wind change. Pompano don't sit still. But the whole bottom line to them is, again, not hard to catch, they're hard to find. And it's amazing to me what a fish that averages 1.5 pounds does to people. fish bites on a beach. You're spiking in on me, you're doing this. No, it doesn't happen with snook, doesn't happen with whiting, doesn't happen with croakers. And I always say this, I have a page in here on beach etiquette. I fish with a few commercial friends that are, I'm not saying you're probably not going to invite them to your son or daughter's wedding, you know what I mean, for a conversation. And if you ever want to meet a couple of these folks, and this is what, and believe me, we did break up a fight last year, but that's what the fish does to you. If you spike in too close, you're going to meet that person. And not really, he's not going to care what your name is, but that type of behavior, when I first came here, going on 13, 14 years ago, that was commonplace. I mean, it was nuts. Doesn't seem to be as bad now. And the nice thing about fishing the beaches around here between St. Lucie Inlet and Fort Pierce, where I do most of my fishing, there's unlimited beach accesses, and I've listed all kinds of beaches in the back. So, can they be in one place? Yes. Will they stay in one place? No. That's not going to happen. You know, during October to May, the snook obviously they say is the #1 saltwater sought after fish in the state of Florida. That's a given. Largemouth bass, freshwater fish. From October to May, everyone agrees the #1 sought after fish is the pompano. It's a 1.5 pound fish, but why? Is it, I dropped some off to New England Seafood where I sell mine the other day. It was $39.99 a pound, which that's crazy. I mean, that's crazy to me. But it's a great tasting fish, but as far as I'm concerned, the thrill's in the hunt. I'm using a 13-foot rod to catch a 1.5 pound fish. They're kind of overmatched. But if you don't have that rod, you won't reach them. So, and what's happened here in 2024 and 25, and I think I put it in the intro, we had, last month we had real cold fronts. Haven't had many real cold fronts in the last few years. Well, I'll tell you what, we had them. And since October, Mother Nature has a fan switch that seems to put it on high 5 out of 7 days during the week. If you own a boat, you know what I'm talking about. The conditions have been horrible. Worse than I mean, obviously you're at her whim when you're on the beach, because we get 3-4 days of northeast wind at a sustained 20. The water's going to look like chocolate milk. You're not going to catch pompano. You're going to catch sail cats or hardheads. That's what you're going to catch. So we've had some very, very, very bad conditions. And I'm calling it inconsistent, but that's the bad news. The good news is everything that's happening is happening late. There's fellows that I fish with that think this fishery, this pompano bite, is going to last well into May. And usually by May, we're catching, we call them dorks, the little ones, the 7 to 8 inches. We were catching dorks a month ago. We're not supposed to be catching small fish. Now, we were catching 10-inch fish. A pompano grows 1 inch a month until it's 12 inches long, which makes it legal. So the 10 inches we were catching a month and a half ago, in another month, guess what? They're probably going to be keepers. During the spring, the best months for pompano, March and April, are when you catch the most numbers. You're not going to catch the biggest ones, but you're going to get, if you're recreational and you're 6 fish, if you don't get 6 fish, then it really isn't a good day, because we get a second shot of fish. We get the fish that migrate from the south. They come out of the Gulf of Mexico. They go down around the bottom of Florida. They stay in the Keys for a very short time, maybe a week, then they're gone. We don't get them when we get the northerly migration in October, but we get them on the way back. Hope Sound and I'll tell you, Hope Sound has always been the spot to go in the spring. There's a reef there, they tend to hold up. That's automatic, it's been automatic fishing, except for this year. They're doing a beach replenishment. Do I have to tell you what the water looks like? Depending on the current, depending on where the dredge is and where they're pumping, if you can find the clean side, go ahead and find it. It might all be all the way down by Tiger Woods' house one day, and the next day it's all the way up at the refuge. So the bottom line there is Hope Sound, I will always tell, usually my charter's in the spring, after daylight saving time, I usually start in Hope Sound because you're gonna catch fish. All bets are off this year. So I'm just throwing that out. But my point here, and the reason I say that, and like I said, I said on the back, we've had a lot of changes to the beaches, and it's in the intro. Beaches will change here on a northeast blow for 2 days. Places that were shallow or deep, places that were deep or shallow. I will tell you, up here in the Fort Pierce area, and I consider the Fort Pierce area, starting by the power plant, Middle Cove, going up the line, you know, Frederick Douglass, it's still closed, I think, for paving. You got John Brooks, where they got the horses now. Then you got Blue Heron. Then you got Coconut. Then you got Surfside. You know, all the way up the line, you got Gulfstream. You got Porpoise Beach. Those are the deepest beaches. They are much, much deeper than anything south of Middle Cove. So you're kind of hands are tied down to the south if you only have a low tide to fish, because the Jensen area, Stewart, that whole area, those beaches are traditionally much shallower. Now, I'll give you a heads up again. We had all that wind in January with those cold fronts. There are beaches that are south of the traffic circle on the Jensen Causeway that are now as deep as your beaches up here. Couple of the beaches you could walk out 30, 40 yards at low tide, it'd be up to your knees. That same beach that I've been fishing that quite often. If you walked out 20 yards, even when the tide is not totally high, I hope you got something on, because you're going in. It's deep. New sandbars they've never been on some of these places. So the point here is, wind can be bad, which it was. Wind can be good. So it has changed some beaches down there. Pompano need water to get in and out. Sharks are constantly after them, and we've had some situations. I had a situation up here a couple weeks ago where I was up at Coconut, 7 shark offs in a row. That's the bad news. The good news is, if the sharks are here, there's something for them to eat. Hopefully, if you lose 1 or 2 to a shark, and you're gonna, the spinners and the black tips during the spring can a little overbearing, go to the next beach, because I take the rod. A lot of times I'll take the rods out, take the baits out of the water, and if you're stopping with the constant noise and all the activity, sometimes they'll leave. Those things were jumping out of the water for an hour. We watched them. So you couldn't get a fish to the beach. That happens in spring. That's the downside of having these deep beaches. It'll hold sharks the whole time. But don't be afraid. You lose 1 or 2 to the sharks, don't worry about it. If you can get some pompano in, just turn that handle as fast as you can and try to get the fish in. But the whole point of all these beaches changing, that's something that happens. What I normally do, because you like to see the runouts or cut throughs, whatever you want to call them. Dead low tide, after a big blow, I'm up and down the beach making notes. I'll be able to tell when that water comes in where that cut or run out is, and that's where you want to put your pompano baits. So, all in all, on that intro page, that's what's happened. We have beaches that are changed. The beaches up here are still deep. Nothing filled in up here. South end of Middle Cove a little bit filled in, but other than that, it's okay. The beaches up here are just fine. So I'll go right to the pompano page. Like I said, we're gonna get. I wanted to highlight the pompano and talk about it. Let's get there. usually I don't have to make notes, but because I have to do this in an hour, I made notes. Okay, I said before, 1.5 pound fish, 13-foot rods. There's two reasons, the two major reasons you don't catch pompano from the beach. You can't reach them, or you're fishing in water like we had today down in Jensen Beach. It's dirty. They do not like dirty water. Will you catch them in dirty water? Yeah, you will. Are you going to catch consistently in dirty water? No, you're not. Not going to happen. Just not going to happen. But not reaching them during the winter, believe it or not, is much more critical than the spring run that I always say starts after daylight saving time. They have a tendency, when the switch changes, early morning, high tide, during the winter, throw them out in the dark. The bite traditionally is always better during the morning, during the winter. And it's like they can read a calendar. As you start getting into March, the big catches, when we start catching bigger numbers, are a high tide in the afternoon. Longer periods of light. Water temperature has changed. Their habits changed. And the other thing that happens during the spring, when we start losing the wind, the water has a tendency to clean up. When the water cleans up, they get a little more skittish. We call it no bling in the spring. I take the floats, take almost everything off except a little bead. You'll do much better on a plain hook if the water is calm and clear. The other situation in the spring, when this water really backs off, and I'll talk about it here in a little bit, if you've never caught a permit, you get that clean water. I call it swim fin and snorkel water. When you get that bluish stuff and it's calm, put a bigger piece of fish bite or catch one of those white spotted crabs and throw it out. Our permit population on the beach and the bonefish has increased every year, but the permit have really increased. 3 weeks ago, Wednesday and Thursdays is when we had that shot of westerly wind, when everything was pretty calm. I had a couple friends of mine that they wouldn't know a permit if it bit them in the toe. I had a buddy of mine, he's been down here 20 years, never caught one. He caught 2 in one day. One was about 20 pounds and one was about 13 pounds. I don't keep them, personally. It's a game fish. Look, they taste good. They definitely taste good. But you can keep them. They are legal. But the situation here, most of the times with the permit, and I'm saying that they're going to show up here as these water temperature rise and it gets calmer and cleaner, plain hook on them too, once that happens. And if you've never hooked a 20-pound permit on a light, I mean, these rods that everybody's using now are pretty light. You're going to know if you don't get sharked off right away and it's not a jack. The permit will make a little run to the east, and then they're just like pompano. They're going to go up and down the beach. They're going to go north and south. They're not going east and west. The key to lane, if you hook a bigger one, and a lot of times when they turn, if it's sunny and calm, it looks like a manhole cover, but it's silver. The key to that is because believe me, the bigger pompano will take some line out, but not like this permit. When you don't get bit off, and it didn't go east, it's probably a permit, but you are going to increase your chances 100% by taking the rod out of the sand spike and following that fish up the beach. Cut the angle down. You don't, it might take 80, 90 yards off, 100 yards off. You don't want all that line in the water. The other thing is, if there's people swimming, you don't want to take their ears off, because that permit, it doesn't care. And the first 2 runs you get out of a permit are going to be real runs. That's a real fish. And after that, slow and steady wins the race. Keep the rod pointed at them. If there's any type of waves, let the waves help you land the fish. But the whole key to landing, just like a pompano, and I'll talk about that too when I get a little bit, putting the rod almost in the sand, walking back and reeling. If it's a two-man operation, it's going to be a lot easier because you can grab them by the tail and pick them up, and I do that to get a picture of them and get them right back out. Let the waves, if there's any type of wave actions, be your help. I fish 15-pound mono, so I'm not horsing any 25-pound permit in. But if you cut the angle down, you got a much better chance. Not going to get nicked on any shells or like we have up and down the beaches. But there's a lot of pompano around. But there's a lot of permit around, more than I have ever seen. I call the pompano, I call it a humbling fish, because just like today, man, we caught them yesterday. Here we go, still looking for the first pompano bite. It will humble you. Understand something. And the other thing about a pompano, if you have, when they do school up, they have a tendency, like the permit, they swim in a circle. That guy 50 yards down from you, boy, he got one, he got another. We're sitting there watching, I got bait on here? They won't stay. They will move. They move up and down the beach. If you see pompano being caught, you're in the right area. Don't move. You're going to get a chance. They move north and south. And like I said, I just mentioned before, as we get further into the spring, staggering your casts, where now everything we're throwing is 75 to 100 yards out. Once it starts to change here in the middle of next month, stagger them. 50, 60, if you're fishing 4, 50, 60, 80, 100. Bathtub Beach last year in Sailfish Point, if you cast more than 40 yards on a lot of days, you didn't catch a pompano. You could have used the rods I was using jigging on, the 7-foot medium action or lay action rods I was using today on the bridge. They have a tendency to move in. The other situation that's going to keep the pompano in closer, and I'll talk about it when I get to the baits, is the influx of sand fleas. For years here, when they did all this beach replenishment, we hadn't seen sand fleas for years. Well, the train arrived in the station again this year because they're everywhere. There's going to be bait for these fish to eat. Do not overcast them. Make sure you keep at least, if you're only fishing 2 rods, keep one short. Bait fishing, whatever they're doing, and they have an extra person, you see them doing this. They're not trying to catch a mackerel. He's trying to catch pompano. They stay with the mackerel. They eat all that stuff the mackerel are chewing up, and down it goes. You can see it in their bellies when, if you keep them, when you fillet them. So mackerel boats are a good indicator. It hasn't happened this year. A lot of things have, it's just been a very, again, like I said in the handout, very inconsistent year. But that in years coming forward, that's something to think about. If you see the mackerel boats, get to that beach. I would go to the lights, find out the closest beach, throw them out, you catch pompano. I mentioned before, time-wise, early morning, high tide, winter. Afternoon, high tide, spring, in the summer is when you catch the numbers. Don't know why. And I've asked I got a couple guys that have been doing it 40, 50 years, and if you ask the 4 of them, I'm going to get 4 different answers, so it doesn't make any difference, but it does hold true. And we'll be coming up on that, because this wintertime bite is a distance situation. You need to be able to have the long rods and able to, if you're going to reach them. And I mentioned it already, I'm not going to say it again, the clean water, clean green. I actually have a picture in here of reading the water. You see that color of the water? If you can see that bluish green, a little bit of sediment in it, stay there. I'm not moving. If I got that water in front of me, especially with the way this water has been, as dirty as it's been, up and down this season, if I find a beach, maybe nobody caught a fish there for a week. If I find that water, I'm sitting there. I'll sit there. Always wait on a tide change also, whether it's high or low. If you're within an hour of a tide change, yesterday they bit on that high tide, it changed, they bit their heads off for an hour, and after that, go home. Just shut off. Tide changes will bring you bites. Pay attention to a tide chart, it becomes your friend at that point. You know, the how, and again, everything that I put in the handout here are recommendations that I use, whether it's a hook, whether it's a reel, whether it's a rod, they're recommendations. This is what has worked for me. If you have a better way, you have a better setup, you have a better bait, you have a better reel, I'm fine with that. Good for you. I've just put stuff in here that has worked for me over the years. It doesn't mean that's the only way it is. You know, the guys say, oh, if you don't do it this way, you're not. No, that's not true. So, if you have a variation, I got a lot of resistance from a couple of my friends, a couple of commercial buddies, when I started using the small circle hooks. I use a number 1 circle hook. That's a small hook. Very small hook. I catch permit on that hook. The reason I switched way back when, before I started making rigs commercially, the reason I did was because a couple of the guys were using 2.0 and 3.0 circle hooks, and they were great. You'd catch a pompano on it. I like catching whiting. I like catching croaker because I like eating them. They have small mouths. The initial reason I started using small hooks had nothing to do with the pompano. I wanted to get something biting. Well, since then, you find small hooks catch big fish. That's not my line. That's Freddie that owns the Snook Nook. But with the onset of fish bites, and I'll talk about that when I talk about bait, a couple things happen. You know, it used to be those big kale hooks people would use. We used to use them for fluke, flounder, or whatever you want to call them down here. Fluke up north, but the big kale hooks, we used to fish live killies, big strips of squid, whatever the case may be. But the kale hook was the hook to use. They used to call it up there the poor man's circle hook. Well, I don't like them, and the reason I don't like those bigger hooks, whether it's a 2.0 or 3.0, and I like the little one, I cut all of my fish bites into a diamond shape, and there's a picture in your handout of how I do it, and I cut a tail in it. You got to remember, when you cast your line out, and whether you're using a Sputnik or a 4-ounce pyramid, and when I talk about bite detection in a couple minutes, that line is tight going to the bottom. So these hooks are suspended slightly off the bottom. If you use a big hook with a small piece of fish bite, you're going to overpower the fish bite. Cutting it into a diamond shape, cutting a tail into it, take it one day if you want to take a look. And if we got some water running in the trough in front of you, put it down there and see what it does. It flutters. I got so many, you gotta be nuts. Well, I will tell you, 3 of my closest friends that have been doing this for 40 years, they use small hooks now, and they cut their fish bites into diamond shapes. It does work. Now, you're also going to attract other stuff. You're going to attract the bluefish and the mackerel and everything else, but the reason for that small hook, it does not impair the action of the fish bite. I fish 4 rods, 4 13-footers. My first 2 rods, if you fish with me today, if you fish with me a year from now, will have plain fish bites on them, 3/4 of an inch long. My other 2 rods, especially this year, used to be clam strips when we didn't have the sand fleas, will be a sand flea and a piece of fish bite, a smaller piece of fish bite with the sand flea. You want to make sure that point in that barb, when that pompano grabs it, can penetrate his mouth. A smaller piece with the sand flea. I fished 4 rods, 2 plain, 2 with sand fleas. Yesterday, 75% plain fish bites. No sand flea. We had live sand fleas. Like I said before, we were on the beach, you didn't even need a rake, you just kick them up with your toes. There were so many sand fleas. So they're everywhere, but it can be the other way, and it happens the other way. But that's the reason, and if you look at, like I say, they're 1s and 1/0s. I use mustad hooks. There's great tackle manufacturers. I just like the smaller hook. You got less metal in the water also. So, anytime, pompano are sight feeders, by the way. They got great eyes. If you ever seen any, there's some videos, it's pretty crazy how things will catch their eye. There's videos of them with a sand flea sitting on the hook with the float above the hook. They're hitting the float. They're not even looking at the sand flea. Why? Who knows? Catches his eye. So the point there is I like the smaller hooks. A couple years ago, with fish bites in their R&D department, they make fish bites. Obviously, I'm going to be again. I'm partial, and you can tell because just look at my handout. But this bait has really revolutionized surf fishing. I mean, it's the fish bites. You keep them in the refrigerator when you're not using them. They don't smell. If you keep them cool, they will keep their color. The scent that they use, whether it's a crab, squid, clam, will last forever. It's always scent, different types. I went up, toured their facility, a jar of, this guy, Dr. Carr, he originated that company. He was a marine biologist, took DNA out of clams, sand fleas. They make it into a powder. The jar of powder, they're about this big. When they mix these baits, $5,000 initially to make that powder. They now have, I mean, they even got it for offshore now. They're starting to make freshwater baits. They got squid chunks. They got all kinds of stuff. But the point is, and I liken this to bass fishermen, freshwater bass fishermen. We started because they were making so many different colors. You know, if they're making a scent in a crab scent, but they got yellow, they got chartreuse, they got pink, they got 5 different colors. So, even in my little brain, I said, well, there's a reason they're making different colors. They're sight feeders. I started making rigs that matched the fish bites. Now I call this orange crush, but it's the exact same color as Easy Flea. The sand flea scent, the orange and white. Because if color didn't matter, it's like going into our worm department at Bass Pro Shop. If you're a freshwater bass fisherman, now we got worms that go from here to the back of the room. But if you want darker water, you want a Houdini color, or you want a watermelon red flake, or a white with black flakes in it, there's a reason colors are made. Just like there's colors made for these artificial baits. So if they like the color so much, and like I said, I started doing this 2 years ago, even like this electric chicken, this pink and yellow, has been on fire since they came out with the Easy Flea scent. But the rig that I make is yellow and pink. Now, you don't have to buy my rigs, and that's not the reason I'm saying that, because if you go to any tackle store, there are numerous rigs available with different colored floats. If you're going to use orange and white, like Tackle Crafters makes one, get the orange float. There's a reason they make different colors of bait. And it works. again, my naysayers, all my buddies that fish with me, they now tie their own rigs and they do the exact same thing. There has to be a reason. Sight feeders, they like a color. And I start with 4 different colors in the morning. Because you know what happens? Suppose you're trolling offshore for blackfin tuna and they're hitting the black and purple feather behind the boat, and that rod keeps getting hit and getting hit and getting hit, and your pink and white and blue and white, you might as well not have hooks in them because you're not getting any bites. If you see a pattern, I won't change them all. If I see they're hitting the orange and white, or they're hitting the electric chicken, or the pink and white, I'll change one of the rods. 8 times out of 10, that's going to be your color for the day. And when we have a good day, I usually end up with at least 3 of a particular color. But I start with 4 different colors. It could be water clarity. A lot of times the water that you see on the surface is not the same color it is on the bottom at 100 yards out. That's why there's days when the water seems dirty, you're catching pompano, because the water on the bottom's clean. Cleaner, more visibility. The days when the sediment is real bad and you think there's pompano there, I try to use something brighter because they can see through it. But as far as bait's concerned, that's why I match the color of the float to the bait. And trust me, it does work. Sinkers. There's a reason you use Sputniks. And there's all kinds of Sputniks. And if there's ever been a year of the Sputnik, it's been this year with 20 or 25 mile an hour winds. And I'll be honest with you, those days of west wind, we always say the first day of the west is the best on the beach when it calms down. After that, they have a tendency to get a little skittish like they do in the spring. But those days of 1 to 3s, this entire winter has been overshadowed by 4 to 6s. But if you want to fish, you got to use this. And the reason you got to use the Sputniks, Sputnik goes in, this is the way you set, that's the way you cast it out. These are sinker guy Sputniks. There's all kinds of different types. But what happens, when you get a fish or you start to reel it in, they release. And when the 4 arms release, just like bringing in a sinker. Now, don't do what I did, and I tell this story, and I always tell it, because don't take everything for granted. The first time they sold me these at Snook years ago, and it was a different type. They used to have beads, red beads here right at the elbow. And I found, unless you went home before you used them, put some crazy glue on that elbow, by the end of your first day, you lost most of the beads. The problem is, there's indentations in the lead that affixes these things that keeps them tight. But make sure if you've never used them, the first time is going to be fine. You're going to go ahead and do it. First day I used them, held beautiful, first set of casts. After that, couldn't get them to hold. And they're more money. That's the other thing. These happen to be stainless and they'll last forever unless you get sharked off. I went back, I raised hell at the Snook Nook because they're a ripoff. Do yourself a favor. If you've never used them before, make sure you reset them. Guess who didn't? Right here. 4 of them I'm fishing one day. I can't get them to hold. And if you haven't used them before, it's a common mistake. We tell people that. Well, the Bass Pro, please remember to reset them. The reason for these, a 4-ounce Sputnik will hold like a 6-ounce pyramid. Has the same holding power. Why do you have to hold so tight? The reason being is, and it's the same reason I don't use braid on my pompano reels. I use monofilm. The reason you use Sputniks, they stick in the sand and you bite detection. What happens is and that's in here in the techniques. All of my rods, if you look at all my rods, especially, now today there was a swell. My son was using all Sputniks. The tips of my poles are bent slightly. And this is what I use, these 13-foot over the bar rods, but it's got a light tip. They're rated for 3 to 5 ounce. But with the bite detection situation, if you look down the line, all my sand spikes, and all 4 rods have a bend in them. What we have found, and my argument forever was, I'm not a big braid guy for this, and I got friends that do catch fish with braid, a little tough on the fingers if you're trying to cast 75, 100 yards. But one of the best proponents of braid is if you're fishing around the seawalls, you're fishing for snook, tarpon, whatever the case may be. You want to turn that fish, it doesn't stretch. Well, when you keep tension on these and it doesn't stretch and your line is tight going in, it creates a condition called a sinker walk. You're not going to, especially during the winter, when we got wind, waves, and current, all of a sudden you're going to see your line start to go a little slack. Well, a couple things can happen. If my rod goes slack, I'm using monofilm, so it's not, and when I say sinker walk, this is not coming way up, it's just going to move. These fish are lazy. They do not like a moving bait. They like them on the bridge when you're jigging. You want that bait as perfect as you can leave it still in the water 80, 90 yards off. You're going to keep it suspended so the crabs aren't tearing you up, those white spotted crabs. But here's what happens. If it sinker walks, the tip starts to come up because you start to develop slack. If I have a tip on any of my rods that is straight up in the air, 2 things have happened. Either I have a fish on, or I miss one. I told the story at Port St. Lucie. My brother-in-law, 2-3 weeks ago, fishing 50 yards from me. He's doing the right thing. I see his one rod for about 15 minutes is straight up in the air like this. So I said, yo, Chuck. I started yelling, check that rod. Well, we look down the beach. A pompano will pick your bait up. He swims it right into the beach. We look in the water I use high-vis yellow. In front of my rods, he's 50 yards up the beach. I see his line. His line's right in front of me. I'm sitting here, what the hell's going on? He starts reeling in. All of a sudden, he walks all down. He walks down, he's reeling. He's got about a 2.5-pound pompano, and it's about 10 yards off the beach right in front of me. They will pick your bait up. They will pick up a 4-ounce Sputnik and swim around like there's nothing on here. If I see a slack line, I missed one or I caught one. Which brings me to another situation with the setups. I use 15-pound high-vis yellow on my reels. 15. I use a 30-pound shock leader of about 10 feet, 12 feet. If you tie direct to 15-pound and you're throwing a 4-ounce or a 5-ounce Sputnik, probably going to snap it off more times than not. The 30-pound shock will certainly be able to take it. I use a particular brand, and I tell everybody, you don't have to buy this. And listen, mono will work too. Poveromo told me, I had Poveromo come to one of my first seminars ever at Bass Pro, and we were talking about line afterwards, this, that, and the other thing. And he said, you're not New Jersey anymore. This is Florida. Use fluorocarbon when you can. Water's cleaner. I use P line, P as in Paul line. That's the type of fluorocarbon that I use. And the reason that I use it, you wouldn't want it to make rigs, because I use 30-pound and 25-pound for my pompano rigs. That P line is a very soft fluorocarbon. I use a blood knot to put my 15 to the 30 when I put the 2 lines together. obviously no terminal tackle, no swivels, nothing like that. But the P line, because it's softer, when you cinch that blood knot down, the profile on the knot, because it's very flexible, is minuscule. And most of these rods now, let me just show you. If you look at these guides, these are hybrid guides. These new rods, like this is an over the bar rod. And you can see how light it is, and when it's over, you want to come up and feel how light this is. It's light. But that P line, because the knot is so small, you will never hang up on any of these guides. And most of the newer rods that people are using for pompano, there's a lot of them that are starting to use hybrid guides. Because what it does, the smaller guide, even though it's coming off a big reel, we call it line slap. It's more like a conventional because your line will stay tighter. Most of the rods have 9 guides on them. So the line going from guide A to guide B to C to D to E, you won't get that slack and that line slap in it. Because you don't get it, you got more distance. Anytime you can get an edge, it could be 5 yards, could be 8 yards, could be 10 yards. Another thing with distance, these guys promote distance. Most of these rods are 2-piece. If you're breaking rods down and putting them in your car, whether it's an 8-foot rod or a 12-foot rod or a 13-foot rod, make sure when you put it back together that your guides line up. My son Randy did that when he first started using these longer rods, and he complained one day because he can't get the distance. Well, the freaking guides are, the one half's pointed this way, the other is pointed this way. Keep them straight. The other thing is the tip, where the salt collects. It gets abrasive. The line has to go through the tip, the very, very small guide. I check my guides every week, take some reel cleaner, get that abrasion off of there. It's a light line, but it will go through that guide a lot easier without that salt residue on it. Distance. If you can't reach them, you can't catch them. And that's another reason why that does work. These are those new over the bar rods, and they've kind of become the thing. But there's a lot of good product out there, and unless I always tell people, unless you're going to be pretty consistent, you don't have to spend $280, $290 on a rod. But these newer rods, and a bunch of manufacturers make them now. Ninja makes them, Over the Bar makes them, Daiwa makes some good ones. The lighter rod, the reason you get distance out of these lighter rods is because the rod loads up. Penn for years would give me rods. I still have them on the wall. They still got the tags on them. If you take a Penn 12-foot Carnage and you want to go pompano fishing with it, if you can reach them, you need to teach me, because it's like throwing a telephone pole. They're rated, anytime you see any of these rods rated for up to like 8 ounce, there's not enough flex. You're throwing a 4-ounce pyramid as a rule. The rod needs to load up in order to get the distance. And it's nothing about strong arming, and I can't extend my arm now, so I won't do it. But as soon as you know when you've made a good cast, it's like hitting a 5-iron dead on the pin, or hitting a baseball. When you make a good cast with these lighter rods, when you release it, it feels like nothing. It feels like you didn't do anything. The rod is behind you. You cast it, you step, your belt buckle should be where the sinker where the sinker lands. And I tell folks, when they buy the longer rods, the beach is probably not the spot to start practicing. you'd have to give out hard hats to everybody up and down the beach, because if you haven't cast one of these, and when you start, if you decide to get a longer rod, to get some distance casting, go to a field. Don't use a 4-ounce pyramid. Use a 2-ounce pyramid. You're not worried about your distance, you're worried about the timing. When you release it, it feels like nothing. And believe me when I tell you, once you get it down, and there's pendulum casts, and I'm not going to get into that, or easy casts where you lay the sinker on the sand. I mean, there's a lot of different techniques that you can do, but these rods, these lighter rods, the 3 to 5 ounce rods are the rods that you need to look for, because that is exactly what we use down here. Now, if you're going to fish the Outer Banks for big red drum, that's not the rod for you, because you're going to be throwing 8 ounce sinkers. That rod can't do that. Shock leader I told you about. Sand spikes, here's the other thing. It's, you know, if you haven't had I call a long rod, anything from 11, 12, 13 up to 15, they're making 15 footers now. If you get the sand spike, that's a 24 or 36 inch, you go ahead and, now, you see how long that rod is, but you see how long the butt is. It goes in the sand spike. If you have miscalculated your drag setting, and you hook a pompano, and that 150-pound black-tipped shark decides he's getting that for lunch, if your drag is too tight because you've got all this rod sitting out of the sand spike, it's going to be like one of the space launches up at Cape Canaveral. Your sand spike's going to go over, and you see it every year. Poor guy trying to run in the water. This rod's in the Bahamas before he can get to the edge of the water. You need something with a little more length. I tell everybody at least 42 to 48 inches on anything 11 foot and up. It gives you a better platform. And the other thing these longer rods do, besides distance, especially during the winter, line entry into the water. We get a lot of big beach breaks, swells from the east, from the northeast, from the southeast. Because you have it in a 42-inch sand spike, and you've got 13 foot of rod, you're up here. But where is that line going into the water? You want to keep a tight line. Remember I said that. Where does that line enter? It enters past where those waves are breaking. Line entry into the water past the waves will keep your line tight, but you need the proper setup to do that. Makes a huge, huge difference. I can sit there on a 4 or 5 foot beach break and I can fish all day because my line is, you know, it's entering the water 50 yards out. Line wise, I use 15-pound high-vis yellow. A lot of us do. It's got nothing to do with fishing. The 15-pound is very small diameter, you get extra distance. The bright yellow, that's why you use a shock leader. You don't want that going to your bait because they're sight feeders. The yellow, the pelicans can see it. If you've been on the beach and you see a squadron coming up the beach, 7, 8, 9 pelicans, and your line's out, it's entering the water at 50 or 60 yards, and Captain Joe in the front of the pelican, he gets in your line, you got a lot of fun. You got a 30 or 40-pound pelican wrapped around your line, you got to bring them in. They are not the nicest birds in the world, believe me. They can see the yellow. You will actually see them when we have the setups. They'll fly out and around. Sometimes, believe it or not, they'll come down the beach and up they go. And they'll actually, we use yellow down here, and I got friends that are fish from Daytona to Jacksonville. They use black mono up there. Same thing. It's got nothing to do with fishing. Keeps the pelicans out of the line. So that's just a little something. Clear, they just can't see it. The rods I talked about, there's a tremendous amount of good products. This rod right here is the best one I've ever used. Bass Pro makes a power stick, and a power stick's probably the best, a 12-footer. It's a great rod. But these over-the-bar rods that have just, they've taken over, they're so easy to cast. and they're so light. But there's, again, I've listed some here. Reel-wise, when I started with Penn, I was using conventional, squalls and fathoms. The star drag reels, the 15s, they have what they call a free floating spindle. And the reason I got a lot of buddies that still use them. The reason they cast so far, that free floating spindle, when you put it in free spool, and you go to cast, that spool disengages from the gears altogether. Now, when I first started and I started doing some guiding and taking people, I would take a spool of line with me and a couple pairs of scissors, because I would spend, if somebody wants to learn how to cast a conventional, it would take me half the day teaching them after I've cut, splice, refilled the lines. When they came out with the long cast, it solved my problem for folks that wanted to cast. The difference between a long cast reel and a regular spinning reel. I brought a couple reels. If you come up here afterwards, this spool is so much taller than the regular spool. Now, what does that do? Mark Talwin, and like I said to a couple folks, Quantum rated Penn. They took their vice president, they took the two best sales guy, and they took their head engineer about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. So the reason I'm talking about, I've been field testing Quantums for about 4 months. They will be coming out with a long cast, but the reason I'm saying that is this taller spool, from a percentage wise, because this spool is taller. Remember what I said about the conventional, it disengages, there is no friction. That's why you gotta use your thumb. You put your thumb, it's like half on the spool and half, once you get that down, but that's how you got the difference. It's a direct drive, smaller guides, everybody used them, and I still got buddies using them. These reels are so easy to use. When they elongated this spool, and they've made 2 or 3 changes along the way, from a coefficient, they tested the friction of the line coming off of the spool. 50% less friction with this taller spool. Less friction, longer distance. Simple. I mean, it's simple mathematics or simple calculations. The line lay on it, this is a much slower oscillating reel. It's going to lay the line kind of like a conventional. You do not want to take this reel offshore to go speed jigging for blackfin tuna. You don't want to do that. It's much slower than your standard, and it gives the line lay better, but you don't get tangles. And I'll tell you right now, and the other thing that I do, because I fish so much, new line casts further. Once I see my line, I change my top 150 of that 15-pound test about every 10 days. The reason is slick line, no abrasion, just another factor. New line will cast further than old line because it does not have any catching qualities. But that's why these new reels, and there's a bunch of manufacturers making them out. Shimano's making them, Okuma's making them, so I don't think Dai was making, oh, maybe they are now. Yeah, I think they are. These have become the thing because they're easy to use. So, long cast reels are long cast reels for that reason. Conventionals, I talked about squall fathom, there's a couple of them there. Also, on page 17, you're going to see the top 5. This changes every year. I have all 5 of those baits here. A couple of them are brand new baits. Easy Flea Electric Chicken has been hands down. I've caught more pompano on that this year since it came out than any other fish bite. Easy Flea is a standard. You can't, the orange and white, you can't go to the beach without it. It's been catching them since they started making the bait. Make sure you have one of them out. This ghost shrimp set is something we do have ghost shrimp here. Correct, right? I've never seen them on the beach, but the scent, Jacksonville, St. Augustine area, they have a tube that looks like a bilge pump, pumping out your bilge pump. They see the hole, I guess, in the sand where the thing goes down and they suck them out. Great bait. They finally making a ghost shrimp scent. Works, it's working good. It works well down here. So these top 5 are the top 5 baits that they did, has been their #1 selling baits, and they have worked for me also. And natural bait, let me talk about sand fleas real quick. They're here. It used to be, years ago, you would catch your sand fleas, you would take them home, you put a pot of boiling water on the stove, put them in a chum bag, 10, 15 seconds, they turn bright orange. Take them out, put them in a bucket of ice water, put them in a bag, put them in a freezer. Because of the abundance of sand fleas these last couple years, and believe me, they're on most beaches. The abundance of sand fleas, don't do it anymore. And the reason you don't have to go through all that, and what we have been doing, we will take them, and by the way, you can keep them alive for 2 or 3 days in the right situation. The reason a sand flea, and I'm not trying to be gross here, the reason they don't live well in a confined area is because they urinate on each other, and it kills them. And you would know if you've left a bucket of them or a pail of them in your cooler, as soon as you open up, say, ooh, man, that's bad. What I do, I have a plastic container that I took a drill, I put holes in it, I put a second container underneath. If you put those sand fleas in a container where their excrement can go down and not affect any of the rest of them, you leave it in a cooler. You can't let fresh water get on them, but you can leave them in that cooler as long as you keep it nice and cold. They'll live for 3-4 days. So it's something. But even that being said, we now take them and put them, we get to sandwich the snack bags, the small ones. Put 15, 20 sand fleas in a bag, put them in the freezer. You know, when we come home from getting, if you haven't used them all the live ones, put them in the freezer. The difference between blanched sand fleas and the gray sand fleas, the natural color, here's what happens. The blanched sand fleas, the orange ones, you can freeze and refreeze them probably 3 or 4 times. Once that consistency of that sand flea starts to deteriorate, they start to turn black. Once they start to turn black, they smell terrible. Throw them away. But you would get 3 or 4 trips out of them. With the gray sand fleas in the snack bags, you might get 2 trips. And the key to keeping them so you can use them for 2 trips, you know, during the day you'll see some of the folks, they put them in bait containers, they leave them in the sun. Put them in a container, put them in your cooler. Even after they're dead, it will keep the shell very, very, very tough. Now, the gray sand fleas that you're not blanching, they will stay on your hook 80% better than the blanched ones, and here's why. When you cook that sand flea, what happens to the shell? It gets brittle. If you don't cook them and you stay natural, I like them only because it's natural color. If you just leave them gray, you can get a couple trips out of them. You're going to be hard pressed. I mean, you put a live sand flea on, you got to work to cast that thing off the hook. It's not coming off. The gray ones, if you keep them cool, you can refreeze them once, use them a second time. They're going to stay on your hook 100% better. Now here, I'll give you a little tip here. If you're fishing, you know, sailfish flats up by the inlet, you'll see a lot of the commercial pompano folks. I have some buddies that do it quite often. They're fishing 8 or 9 rods. They're fishing on the bottom. The sand fleas they use in the river, which is crazy, they chum with the blanched sand fleas. The fish in the river, for some reason, like that orange color. And it's not that they don't like it on the beach, it's just that you're going to get more longevity out of the gray, and the bait's going to stay on your hook better. So, just a point. And again, if you want to target sand fleas, you know, I've been saying this for over a year now. You know, our surf angler population keeps increasing. Well, no kidding, because our population is going right through the roof. So the more people doing it, so you get a lot of people that walk on the beach. I make jokes sometimes because you fish Stewart Beach on a weekend. I always say to Griswold, I'm looking for Chevy Chase to come down because you got 9,000 people running up and down the beach. That will drive the sand fleas down. Late afternoon, outgoing tide. You want sand fleas? Especially after the time change. You go up there 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening, I guarantee you, as we get into the spring, you get up there with a sand flea rake after the majority of people have left the beach, you'll get enough, you'll just get so many sand fleas, you're not gonna know what to do with them. That's how many sand fleas are around. But it's, again, the gray ones are a great bait. I talked about staggering. Look for the long rodders. Look for the people that do it for a living. Don't crowd them. If you can see there's 4 or 5 people fishing long rods, they're probably, and they're all together, they're probably commercial guys. You're probably in the right area. You don't have to be on, because the guy next to you caught one doesn't mean you have to be right on top of them. And there's a lot of people you'd like to convince that to, because I've had that conversation. Landing a pompano. Another, probably the number one reason when I take people on the beach, they haven't caught a pompano before, they have a tendency to lose their first couple. And here's what happens. This is what I do. And I have other folks that do it the same way. Pompano, you're using these nice little circle hooks, they're probably gonna stay buttoned up. Take the rod, when you get a bite, take the rod out of the sand spike, reel down, keep the line tight. You don't want the drag super tight. This fish is, again, the pompano gonna be like the permit, or the permit's gonna be like the pompano. A lot of times, depending on which way the current is flowing. We had a north current a week ago, we had a south current the other day. They will have a tendency, once they hit, they're gonna go with the current. They're lazy, they're going with the current. They will swim normally with the current. Take it out of the spike, and it's not like I'm up home trying to land an 80-pound yellowfin. Point the rod at the fish. I don't need this 13-foot rod up in the air. Point it at the fish, and I tell everybody that has hooked their first pompano, slow and steady wins the race. He's not going anywhere. You got a 13-foot rod with a 7,000 size reel, you're gonna be able to get him into the beach. Slow and steady, but not with a super tight drag. Obviously, you don't want the drag going out when you're reeling, because then we start doing this. Just tight enough, it will start coming in, start coming in, start coming in. Once I see the shock leader, where it's joined at the yellow line, is when I tell my folks, I will go up and I'll just tighten the drag a little bit. I said, reel and walk. Walk back up the beach as you're reeling. If we have wave action, if you time it right, you keep the fish hooked. Keep the pressure on the fish. Let the wave beach the fish. But as you get closer, you're pointing it this way. At the end, the tip of my pole is almost in the sand. Because once that wave recedes, you crank down on it, you can virtually throw them up. I got a buddy a commercial buddy from doing it 50 years. When he lands a pompano, he does it so fast and so little effort, you wouldn't know he had a fish. Because I would, in the beginning, I said, Charlie, where the heck's the fish? No, it's already back there. Down, I don't know, he's got a way, he's using conventionals. That thing goes up on the beach, I mean, it's up on the sand, you're not gonna lose it. But point the rod at the fish, put the tip down, walk and reel. If you keep pressure on it, you're gonna land it. They're not going anywhere. They're just not going anywhere. And they will go north and south. If you have room also, when you set up your rods, if you're fishing, say you're fishing 3, the 2 end rods, if you have room, instead of being at 12 o'clock, put it at about 11. have one at 12, put one at 1, especially with permit around. That permit's gonna take line, and it's gonna go north and south. You can get tangled up pretty quick. But if you can, I call it fan, if you can fan it out a little bit, and you will have a tendency to get them a lot quicker. I'm not gonna have time because I'm actually running out of time. Yeah, I've already ran past time. Whitey, best eating fish in Florida as far as I'm concerned. Delicious. As the water gets warmer, if you want to catch whiting, bring the small rod with you. The first trough, the first drop off, high tide. If you cast more than 10 or 12 yards, you won't catch any. There will be times they will come, you'll see them, they'll come in with the wave. Little piece of fish bite, little piece of shrimp. Delicious eating. I fillet and skin them all, my favorite way. And I have to mention, you have a pompano, new pompano recipe here. George Foreman grill, some breadcrumbs, Hawaiian roll, sliders. I mean, people kill you for them. That's how good they taste. And they're fun to catch because they do pull like heck. And with Randy the other day, we started catching some of the bigger croakers are as good eating as whiting. Easy to fillet, great to eat. The permit, and I'm not going to get into mackerel and the bluefish and all that kind of stuff, but permit, like I said, more than I've ever seen here. We also have a good resident seasonal bonefish fishery. And the bonefish get bigger every year. The bonefish is gonna fool you, your first one you catch, because you think, man, this is a 3-pound pompano. But that bonefish on that 13 knot, that's smoking. It's going down the beach. Because of all the resistance, all that pressure against them, after that first run, they kind of give up. So if you get a big run, it's probably going to be a bonefish. Permit, not so. 2 runs, you're going to get at least 2 good runs, slow and steady, same thing as the pompano. I'll go over one other thing, and then if anybody wants to hear me babble on more, like I said, 8th and 9th. This page, I tried to take this out of a couple seminars that people come to. Everybody will tell you what to do when you are catching them. If you're catching pompano, everybody's a hero. What about if you're not catching them? And I'm telling you, I tried to eliminate this on a couple, and then people got ticked. Off-colored water, you're not reaching them. I can't stress that as much. It's going to take a back seat as we get into the spring. No bait. How about, I see people on the beach, they cast it out, an hour later, they haven't even checked their bait yet. They're fishing on credit. There's nothing on that hook. Between bait stealer, small croaker, whiting, crabs, every 10 to 15 minutes, I'm checking my baits. Usually by the time I'm checking my 4th, it's almost time to go back to the first one and start all over again. Make sure you got bait. Fish bites gives you a little bit of breathing room because they stay in a hook. There's a mesh in that bait that stays on. Bring a pair of braid scissors with you. You can cut the fish bite will dissolve or go away, but you got the mesh on there. It's biodegradable. You can cut it off. It's not going to harm the environment. But that's got mesh on there. No bait. Tension on your line. That's what I talked about. It's got to be tight. If I see no tension, I either have one on or I just missed one. Right tide, wrong beach. Yes?
You mentioned Mosquito Bridge. How long is that gonna be good?
That'll be good right through this. Heck, you're not gonna believe it. I caught some pompano there last July. Those are resident fish. I'm not talking, and that's a great point. I didn't talk about jigging. I've made a joke about it because that's the only thing I can do right at the moment. There's gonna be days on that bridge when it is just gonna be pandemonium. Now, it's like fishing on a party boat. You go over there, you see 35 guys lined up. And here's the other thing. Let me tell you something about that bridge. Because there are a contingency that's been fishing there for years. They tend to kind of take over an area. It doesn't make any difference on that bridge. The water is not deep anywhere. couple little channels in it. Moving water on that bridge. In the springtime, if you want to jig with the goofy jigs, it's kind of like watching paint dry too, because you are doing nothing but this. That 3/8 or half-ounce jig, making sure it hits the bottom. Yellow with a pink teaser, pink with a yellow teaser, or there's a tri-colored pink, yellow, and orange jig that tackle crafters make. Those are, if you're only gonna get 3 jigs, those are the ones. I've been catching everything on that tri-color one. But as long as your jig hits the bottom, bring it up, let it go back down. Now let me tell you, using a 7-foot rod with 15-pound test on it, you get a 2.5-pound pompano, there's no mistaking what you got. Man, that thing is, that'll dog it. But yes, but yeah, those 3/8 to a half-ounce jig, and that fishing will be good from here on out. And it's spotty. Sometimes they come in the inlet and they don't come up this far. They might be at the Stewart Causeway. I don't like fishing there because it's up too high. But the Mosquito Bridge is going to yield fish right now until everything's over with. So yeah, I mean, it's fun. The other thing is, if you're going to go there, unless you're super tall, get a little step stool, because it's like they designed the railing on there so nobody would fish. Because if you don't, you can't get your rod over the thing. I mean, you just get a little step stool from Home Depot. Yes?
A 13-inch pompano and a 13-inch permit. Hard to tell the difference. What's yours?
Okay. Obviously, the position of the fins are different. If you look, the anal fin,
Yeah, but
it's close. It's very close. The forehead shape is a little different. Permit, not all of them. Some of them will have black tips on both fins, both the dorsal and the anal. We catch a lot that have the 2 black tips on them, and that's a dead giveaway, because Pompano's not gonna have that. But
They have fish rules, free app fishrules.com. It'll actually show you a picture.
Yeah.
And it'll distinguish the fin structure.
Yep.
Between a pompano permit and an African pompano.
And I
Exactly.
have